Step over here! Sit on the curb, now!
Easy, officer.
Hands where I can see them! Don't reach! Hey,
I'm reaching for my identification. I said...
here, State Judge, Marcus Caldwell. Copy that.
We good?
Yeah, we're good.
The fluorescent lights of a roadside gas station have witnessed countless ordinary moments. Tired travelers filling their tanks, truckers grabbing coffee before the next long haul, families stretching their legs on summer road trips. But on a humid Thursday evening in late September, the harsh white glow illuminating pump number 7 at a Shell station along Route 22 in Maplewood County would capture something far from ordinary. It would capture the moment when assumption collided with authority, when prejudice met its match in the most unexpected of ways. Before we dive into what happened that night, I want you to drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from right now. Whether you are tuning in from a small town or a major city, your perspective matters. And if stories like this one resonate with you, consider staying until the very end. What unfolds here will challenge everything you think you know about who gets stopped, who gets questioned, and why. The man behind the wheel of the midnight blue Lexus LX600 that evening was 55 years old. His name was Raymond Caldwell, and for the past 19 years, he had served on the state superior court bench. His salt and pepper hair was cut short and neat. His charcoal gray suit jacket hung on a hook in the back seat, left there after a long day of proceedings. The silk tie he had loosened around his neck was burgundy with subtle silver threads running through it. His wedding ring caught the last traces of sunset as he guided his vehicle off the highway and toward the glowing Shell sign that promised fuel and nothing more. Judge Caldwell had spent his entire career studying the law. He understood its power to protect and its capacity to fail. He had seen defendants tremble before his bench, some guilty, some innocent, all of them human beings caught in a system that could elevate or destroy them with a single ruling. He believed in justice the way some people believe in gravity. It was not a matter of faith for him. It was physics, cause and effect, action and consequence. The courtroom was his cathedral, and the Constitution was his scripture. But none of that mattered in the moment he pulled up to Pump 7. In that moment, in the fading light of a Thursday evening, he was simply a black man in an expensive car. And to a certain type of observer, that combination told a story all by itself, a story that had nothing to do with truth. The gas station sat at the intersection of Route 22 and Miller Creek Road, a spot that served as an unofficial boundary between the wealthier suburbs to the north and the working-class neighborhoods to the south. The station itself was unremarkable. 8 pumps arranged in 2 rows, a small convenience store with windows plastered in advertisements for energy drinks and lottery tickets, a single overhead canopy that buzzed with the sound of insects drawn to its lights. The parking lot needed repaving, and weeds pushed through cracks in the concrete near the air pump station. Judge Caldwell had stopped at this particular location hundreds of times over the years. It was convenient, situated almost exactly halfway between the courthouse and his home in the Riverside Estates development. The attendants recognized him, or at least recognized his vehicle. He was a good tipper when he paid inside, always polite, always patient, even when the line moved slowly. To them, he was just another regular customer, but regularity means nothing when the wrong eyes are watching. Officer Derek Stanton had been with the Maplewood County Police Department for 8 years. He was 34 years old, with close, cropped brown hair and a build that suggested frequent visits to the gym. His patrol area covered the stretch of Route 22 that included the Shell station, and he had developed what he called a sixth sense for trouble. His fellow officers had another name for it. Some called it intuition. Others called it aggressive. A few, speaking only in whispers and never on the record, called it profiling. Stanton had a reputation in the department. His traffic stop numbers were consistently among the highest in his unit. His supervisors praised his proactive approach to policing. But buried in the department files, accessible only to those who knew where to look, were 14 citizen complaints filed against him over the past 5 years. The complaints followed a pattern. Black and brown drivers stopped for minor infractions that often turned out to be nothing at all. Vehicles searched based on suspicions that never materialized into evidence. Motorists detained and questioned, then released without charges, left with nothing but damaged dignity and lost time. None of these complaints had resulted in disciplinary action. They were investigated internally, deemed unsubstantiated, or explained away as misunderstandings. Officer Stanton continued his patrols, continued his stops, continued his approach to law enforcement that treated certain people as suspects before they had done anything at all. On this particular Thursday evening, Stanton was parked in the lot of an abandoned furniture store about 200 yards from the Shell station. He had finished a late dinner, a cold sandwich from home that he ate in 3 quick bites between radio calls. The evening had been quiet so far. A speeding ticket on the highway, a welfare check on an elderly resident whose neighbor had not seen her in 2 days. Nothing that got the blood pumping, nothing that felt like real police work. He was watching the gas station without really watching it, the way veteran officers learn to observe their surroundings with peripheral awareness. Cars came and went, minivans with families, pickup trucks with contractors heading home from job sites, sedans and coupes and hatchbacks, the ordinary vehicles of ordinary lives. And then the Lexus pulled in. It was the vehicle that caught his attention first. The LX 600 was a luxury SUV that started at well over $90,000. The midnight blue paint gleamed under the station lights, clearly waxed and well-maintained. The chrome accents sparkled. The tinted windows were legal but dark enough to obscure the interior. Everything about the vehicle announced wealth, success, arrival. Stanton straightened in his seat. His eyes narrowed as he watched the Lexus navigate between the pumps, sliding into position at number 7 with the smooth confidence of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. The driver's door opened. A black man stepped out. Something shifted in Officer Stanton's mind. A calculation was being made, one that had nothing to do with observed criminal behavior and everything to do with patterns that existed only in his own assumptions. A vehicle like that, a man like that. The math did not add up in his head. Someone should check this out. Someone should ask some questions. Someone should make sure everything was legitimate. He started his patrol car's engine. Judge Caldwell did not notice the cruiser approaching as he removed the gas cap and reached for the pump handle. His mind was elsewhere, still processing the day's proceedings. He had presided over a complicated civil case involving a construction company and allegations of substandard materials. The testimony had been technical and dense, and he was still turning over the details in his mind, considering how the evidence would shape his eventual ruling. He inserted his credit card into the pump's reader. The machine beeped its approval. He selected the premium grade, as he always did, and began fueling his vehicle. The September air was thick with humidity, the kind of sticky warmth that made you long for October. Crickets sang in the scrub grass beyond the station's perimeter. A truck rumbled past on Route 22, its trailer rattling with cargo. The numbers on the pump climbed steadily, gallons and dollars accumulating with mechanical precision. None of this was remarkable. None of this suggested anything out of the ordinary. And yet, the first indication that something was wrong came with the flash of red and blue lights, not accompanied by a siren, just the lights themselves, strobing across the gas station's pavement in a pattern that demanded attention. Judge Caldwell looked up from the pump to see a Maplewood County patrol car pulling into the station. It did not stop at one of the other pumps. It did not park in a designated space near the convenience store. Instead, it angled directly toward him, positioning itself to block his vehicle's exit. A strange feeling settled in the judge's stomach. Not quite fear, not yet. Something more like disbelief, the cognitive dissonance of experiencing something you thought only happened to other people. The patrol car's driver's side door opened. Officer Derek Stanton emerged, one hand resting on the grip of his service weapon, the other holding a flashlight, even though the station's overhead lights provided ample illumination. His body language was tense, coiled, ready for a confrontation. "Sir, I need you to step away from the vehicle." The words hung in the humid air. Judge Caldwell felt time slow down, felt every detail of the moment imprint itself on his consciousness with crystalline clarity. The buzz of the overhead lights, the smell of gasoline, the distant sound of traffic on the highway, and in front of him, a uniformed officer approaching with the demeanor of someone expecting trouble. 20 years on the bench had taught Judge Caldwell many things about human nature. He had watched defendants become belligerent and watched that belligerence destroy their cases. He had seen innocent people panic under pressure and guilty people remain unnaturally calm. He understood that in any confrontation with law enforcement, composure was not just advisable, It was survival. He set the pump handle back in its cradle, even though his tank was not yet full. Slowly, deliberately, making sure his hands were visible at all times. "Good evening, officer. Is there a problem?" His voice was measured, calm, the same tone he used when attorneys in his courtroom became too heated. It was a voice designed to lower the temperature of any conversation, to signal that reason could prevail over reaction. Stanton did not respond to the question. Instead, he swept his flashlight beam across the Lexus's interior, through the tinted windows, searching for something that was not there. "This vehicle matches the description of one reported stolen earlier this afternoon. I need to see your license and registration. Now." Judge Caldwell felt his jaw tighten. Matches the description. He knew what that phrase meant. He had heard it used in his courtroom countless times, sometimes legitimately, sometimes as a catch-all excuse for stops that had no other justification. A dark luxury SUV driven by a black man. How many vehicles in this county might match such a description? How many would actually be stopped? But he said none of this. Not yet. "Of course, officer. My wallet is in my left rear pocket. My registration is in the glove compartment. I'm going to reach for my identification now, slowly." He announced every movement before making it, a survival technique that no citizen should have to employ, but that Black Americans learn as surely as they learn to walk. Reach slowly. Keep hands visible. Do not give anyone a reason to claim they felt threatened. His wallet was leather, worn at the edges from years of use. He extracted his driver's license and handed it to the officer, watching Stanton's face for any sign of recognition, any indication that the name printed on that plastic card might register. It did. For a fraction of a second, something flickered in Officer Stanton's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or uncertainty. The license read Raymond T. Caldwell, and beneath the name was an address in Riverside Estates, one of the most exclusive developments in the county. But whatever doubt might have surfaced in the officer's mind was quickly suppressed. The script had already been written in his head, and he was not prepared to deviate from it. "The registration," Stanton said, "from the glove box." Slowly. Judge Caldwell nodded. He moved toward the passenger side of his vehicle, conscious of every step, every angle, every way his movements might be interpreted. The glove compartment opened with a soft click. Inside were the documents most drivers keep there, insurance cards. The vehicle's registration, an owner's manual he had never once consulted. But there was something else as well, a leather credential case that most people would never have reason to carry. Inside that case was a gold-embossed badge and an identification card that declared its bearer to be a sitting justice of the state Superior Court. Judge Caldwell did not reach for that case, not immediately. He retrieved only the registration, the document the officer had requested, and handed it through the open passenger window. Why didn't he simply reveal who he was? Why not end the confrontation before it could escalate further? The answer to that question lies at the heart of what this encounter was really about. Judge Caldwell did not want his profession to be the thing that earned him respect. He wanted to be treated with the basic dignity that any citizen deserves. He wanted Officer Stanton to look at the documentation, see that the vehicle was legitimately registered to him, and apologize for the inconvenience. He wanted the system to work the way it was supposed to work, without requiring him to invoke authority he should not have needed. That is not what happened. If you have ever been in a situation where you knew you were being treated unfairly, where you could feel the weight of someone else's assumptions pressing down on you, I want you to pause for a moment and share that experience in the comments. These stories matter. Your voice matters. And if you want to hear more accounts of people standing up against injustice, make sure you have subscribed to this channel because we bring you these stories every week. Officer Stanton examined the registration. His flashlight played across the document, illuminating the typed information. The vehicle identification number, the make and model, the registered owner's name, Raymond T. Caldwell. The same name on the driver's license. The address in Riverside Estates. Everything matching. Everything legitimate. A reasonable officer would have accepted this evidence and moved on. A reasonable officer would have apologized for the inconvenience, explained that they were simply being thorough, and wished the motorist a safe evening. This is what training manuals prescribe. This is what departmental policy requires. This is what basic human decency would suggest. But Officer Stanton was not feeling reasonable. He was feeling something else entirely, a kind of stubbornness that had nothing to do with the law and everything to do with his ego. He had made a decision. He had committed to this stop. He had positioned his cruiser to block the Lexus. And now the evidence in front of him was threatening to prove him wrong. Some people cannot accept being wrong. They will contort reality itself before admitting an error. I'm going to need you to step away from the vehicle, sir. Keep your hands where I can see them. Judge Caldwell felt the first real flash of anger ignite in his chest. Not the explosive kind. Not the kind that leads to raised voices and clenched fists. The cold kind. The kind that comes from recognizing injustice while possessing the discipline to respond strategically rather than emotionally. Officer, you have my license. You have my registration. The vehicle belongs to me. On what basis are you detaining me? Stanton's face hardened. In his world, civilians did not ask questions like that. Civilians complied. Civilians accepted his authority without challenge. A man who knew his rights, who questioned the basis for an encounter, was not a good civilian. He was a problem. I need to verify some information. There have been multiple vehicle thefts in this area matching this description. Just cooperate, and we can get this sorted out quickly. Multiple vehicle thefts. A careful choice of words, vague enough to sound legitimate. Specific enough to justify continued detention. It was the kind of phrasing that appears in police reports when the truth needs to be massaged, when a stop that should never have happened needs to be retroactively justified. I would like to see your supervisor, Judge Caldwell said. The request was procedural, the kind of thing that any citizen has the right to make. But Stanton heard it as an escalation, a challenge to his authority. His hand moved from the grip of his weapon to his radio. Unit 47 requesting backup at the Shell station on Route 22 and Miller Creek. Possible stolen vehicle. Driver not cooperating. Not cooperating. Another careful choice of words. Another entry that would eventually appear in a report. But the cameras were watching. The station's security cameras. The dash cam in Stanton's cruiser. And something else that neither man had noticed yet. A woman had emerged from the convenience store moments after the patrol car pulled in. Her name was Teresa Mendez, and she worked as a shift manager at a distribution warehouse on the other side of the county. She had stopped to buy a bottle of water and some aspirin for a headache that had been building all day. Now she stood frozen by the store's entrance, watching the scene unfold at Pump 7. Teresa had grown up in a household where police encounters were not abstractions. She had an uncle who spent 3 years fighting a wrongful arrest. She had friends who had been stopped and searched for reasons that never made sense. She knew what she was watching, knew it in her bones, and her first instinct was to pull out her phone and start recording. She was not obvious about it. She held the phone at chest level, pretending to check her messages, but the camera lens was pointed directly at the confrontation. The footage would capture everything that followed. The backup arrived within 4 minutes. Officer Kyle Patterson was younger than Stanton, only 28, with barely 3 years on the force. He was shorter and more heavily built, with the thick neck and broad shoulders of a former football player. His cruiser pulled in from the opposite direction, boxing the Lexus between the two patrol vehicles. Patterson approached his fellow officer with a questioning look. "What do we have?" Stanton spoke quietly, but not quietly enough that Judge Caldwell couldn't hear. "Possible stolen vehicle. Driver's being difficult." Being difficult. The phrase landed like an accusation, as if asking reasonable questions constituted difficulty, as if standing up for one's rights was a form of resistance. Patterson looked toward Judge Caldwell, sized him up with the quick assessment that officers are trained to make. Well-dressed, composed, not agitated or aggressive. Nothing about the man's demeanor suggested any threat whatsoever, and yet Patterson did not question his colleague's assessment. The blue wall held. One officer's word carried weight with another officer regardless of what the evidence suggested. "Sir, we're going to need you to sit on the curb while we verify the status of this vehicle." Judge Caldwell felt something shift inside him. The cold anger was still there, but it was joined now by something else. A profound weariness. A recognition that this was not new, would never be new, had been happening to men who looked like him for generations. His suit cost more than these officers earned in a week. His education exceeded theirs by decades. His authority, in the proper context, could determine the course of their careers. And none of that mattered. None of it could protect him from this moment. "I'm not going to sit on the curb," he said. His voice remained steady, but there was an edge to it now that had not been there before. I have provided identification. I have provided registration. The vehicle is mine. If you wish to verify that information, you are welcome to run the plates through your system, but I will not be treated like a criminal for stopping to buy gasoline." The two officers exchanged a look. This was not going according to script. Civilians were supposed to comply. They were supposed to recognize the badge and the uniform and the weapons and understand that resistance only made things worse. They were not supposed to know their rights. They were not supposed to exercise them. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time to cooperate," Stanton said. His hand had returned to the grip of his service weapon. "If you refuse, I will have no choice but to place you under arrest for obstruction." Obstruction, another word that gets deployed when officers have no other justification. What was being obstructed? An investigation that never should have begun. Questions that had already been answered. Judge Caldwell recognized the trap closing around him. If he refused, he would be arrested. If he was arrested, his face would be pressed against the hood of his own vehicle. His hands would be cuffed behind his back. He would be transported to the station, booked, photographed, processed through a system he knew intimately from the other side. And then it would be his word against theirs. A black man claiming mistreatment versus two officers claiming they followed procedure. The story was as old as the badge itself. But this story had witnesses. And this story had evidence. The moment stretched. The overhead lights buzzed. The crickets continued their evening chorus, indifferent to human drama. Somewhere on Route 22, a car honked its horn at another. Life continued all around this small island of confrontation, this gas station that had become a stage for something that should never have been performed. "Officer," Judge Caldwell said slowly, "I am going to reach into my vehicle's glove compartment one more time. Inside, you will find a credential case. I suggest you examine it before you make any decisions you cannot take back." There was something in his tone now that made both officers pause. Not a threat, not aggression, something else. The quiet confidence of a man who held cards he had not yet played. Stanton's eyes narrowed, but he nodded almost imperceptibly. Judge Caldwell moved toward the passenger side of the Lexus, conscious of every breath, every heartbeat, every possible way this could still go wrong. The glove compartment opened. His fingers found the leather credential case. He held it up so the officers could see it clearly before opening it. The gold-embossed badge caught the light. The words, State Superior Court, gleamed against dark leather. The identification card displayed his photograph, his name, and his title. The Honorable Raymond T. Caldwell, Associate Justice. The reaction was not subtle. Officer Patterson's face went pale. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again as his brain struggled to process what he was seeing. He took a step back, as if physical distance might somehow undo his involvement in this encounter. Officer Stanton's reaction was more complex. There was shock there, certainly, but there was also something else. Defiance, perhaps, or denial. The machinery of his assumptions was grinding against the evidence before him, and the friction was producing something that looked a lot like anger. "I don't know where you got that," Stanton said, "but anyone can buy a fake badge online." Judge Caldwell had presided over many trials. He had watched defendants dig themselves deeper into holes they had created. He had seen people double down on lies when the truth would have served them better. He recognized the behavior pattern immediately. "Officer, I am going to ask you one time, and one time only, to verify my credentials through proper channels. You can contact the State Judicial Commission. You can contact the Superior Court directly. You can run my name through any database you have access to. What you cannot do is continue to detain me on the basis of a suspicion that has been thoroughly refuted." His voice had shifted. This was no longer the tone of a citizen trying to navigate a difficult situation. This was the voice of a man who had spent 2 decades commanding courtrooms, who had silenced combative attorneys with a single word, who understood authority in a way that these officers could only pretend to. Patterson was already backing toward his cruiser. "Derek, maybe we should just verify and let this go. I'll run his plates, run his credentials, and we can clear this up." But Stanton was not ready to let it go. The stop had been his idea. The accusation had been his accusation. If it turned out to be baseless, if this man really was who he claimed to be, then Stanton would have to reckon with what that meant. He would have to acknowledge that he had stopped a sitting judge for no reason other than the color of his skin and the price of his car. "I'm not taking orders from him," Stanton muttered. He can wait until we verify everything. Then verify, Judge Caldwell said. I have nothing but time. It was not true, of course. His wife was waiting for him at home. There was work to be done, cases to review, opinions to draft, but he recognized that this moment had transcended his personal schedule. This moment was about something larger than one man's inconvenience. This was about the principle of the Stanton's position became more untenable. The vehicle was not stolen. It had never been stolen. There were no reports of a stolen midnight blue Lexus LX 600 in Maplewood County or any surrounding jurisdiction. The entire basis for the stop was fiction, a story that existed only in Officer Stanton's mind, a story built on assumptions rather than evidence, and the credentials were real. Raymond T. Caldwell was indeed a sitting justice of the state Superior Court. He had been appointed 19 years ago by a governor who had since left office. He had presided over thousands of cases. He was, by any measure, exactly who he claimed to be. The news crackled over Patterson's radio. Dispatch confirmed the vehicle's registration. Dispatch confirmed the judge's identity. The words hung in the air, irrefutable, damning. Patterson turned to his fellow officer. His voice was barely above a whisper. Derek, we need to let him go. Right now. But Stanton did not move. His hand remained on his weapon. His eyes remained fixed on the judge. There was a calculation happening behind those eyes, a desperate search for some way to salvage the situation, some justification that would allow him to maintain his position. He found nothing. The approach of a third vehicle broke the standoff, a supervisor's unit distinguished by its additional markings and the lieutenant's insignia on the door. The department had been monitoring the radio traffic, and someone up the chain had recognized that this situation had the potential to become a significant problem. Lieutenant Margaret Chen had been with the Maplewood County Police Department for 22 years. She had worked her way up from patrol officer to detective to supervisor, earning respect through competence and integrity. She was also one of the few women in a leadership position within the department, and she had learned to navigate institutional politics with the same skills she brought to crime scenes. She parked her vehicle and approached the scene with measured steps, taking in everything: the blocked Lexus, the uniformed officers, the well-dressed black man standing at Pump 7 with a credential case in his hand. She had been briefed during the drive over. She knew exactly what she was walking into. Judge Caldwell, she said, her tone respectful but professional. I'm Lieutenant Chen. I apologize for any inconvenience this evening. I understand there was some confusion about your vehicle. Confusion, a diplomatic word, a word that allowed everyone some room to maneuver. Lieutenant, there was no confusion, Judge Caldwell replied. There was an unlawful stop based on no evidence whatsoever. Your officer invented a stolen vehicle report to justify detaining me. I've been standing here for nearly 20 minutes while my credentials were questioned, while I was threatened with arrest, while I was treated as a criminal for the crime of buying gasoline. Lieutenant Chen's face remained professionally neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. Anger, perhaps, or shame. She was a law enforcement officer, and she believed in the institution she served, but she was not blind. She knew what had happened here, and she knew what it meant. I understand, Your Honor, and I want to assure you that this matter will be taken extremely seriously. Officer Stanton, you are relieved of duty for the remainder of this shift. Report to the station and wait for me in my office. Stanton's face twisted. Lieutenant, I was just being thorough. There have been vehicle thefts in this area, and I thought... Now... Officer. The command left no room for argument. Stanton stood frozen for a moment, his jaw working, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. Then, without another word, he turned and walked back to his cruiser. The door slammed. The engine started. He pulled out of the gas station lot and disappeared down Route 22. Patterson remained, uncertain what to do with himself. Lieutenant Chen turned to him with an expression that suggested they would be having a conversation later. Go back on patrol, Officer Patterson. We'll discuss your involvement in this incident tomorrow. Patterson nodded, said nothing, and retreated to his vehicle. Within moments, he too was gone, leaving only the lieutenant and the judge standing in the glow of the overhead lights. Your Honor, I cannot tell you how sorry I am that this happened. I know that words are inadequate, but please know that I take this seriously. This department takes this seriously. Judge Caldwell studied the lieutenant's face for a long moment. He had spent 2 decades reading people, assessing sincerity, distinguishing genuine remorse from performance. What he saw in Lieutenant Chen appeared to be authentic. She was embarrassed, angry, and determined to address what had happened. But that did not undo the experience. That did not erase the 20 minutes he had spent being treated like a suspect. That did not restore the dignity that had been stripped from him by an officer who saw only color and assumption. Lieutenant, I appreciate your response. I recognize that you are in a difficult position, but I want to be clear about something. What happened here tonight was not an isolated incident. Your officer did not make an honest mistake. He targeted me because I am a black man driving an expensive car. He invented justification for a stop that had no legal basis. And when I challenged him, when I asserted my rights as a citizen, he threatened me with arrest. The judge paused, letting the words settle. I have spent my entire career upholding the law. I believe in the system even when the system fails. But I also believe in accountability. What happens next will determine whether this department is serious about addressing the problem or whether it will simply move on and wait for the next incident. Lieutenant Chen nodded slowly. I understand, Your Honor, and I give you my word that this will not be swept under the rug. The gas pump hung idle in its cradle, the judge's tank still not full. Insects continued their orbit around the overhead lights. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the station, a dog barked once and fell silent. I hope that's true, Lieutenant. I truly do. Judge Caldwell retrieved his license and registration, still in Officer Patterson's hand when he departed. He completed filling his tank, an ordinary action that now felt laden with significance. He replaced the gas cap, returned the pump handle to its cradle, and walked around to the driver's side of his Lexus. Before getting in, he turned back to Lieutenant Chen one final time. Lieutenant, there was a woman recording this encounter. She was standing by the convenience store entrance. I suspect you'll want to speak with her, though I imagine she's already gone. But the footage exists. The truth of what happened here is documented. I want you to remember that in the days ahead. Chen's eyes widened slightly. She had not noticed anyone recording. She had been focused entirely on the immediate situation, on de-escalating and documenting. Now she scanned the parking lot, but Teresa Mendez had indeed departed during the interaction, slipping away to her own vehicle and driving off into the night with footage that would soon change everything. I'll remember, Your Honor. Judge Caldwell climbed into his vehicle. The leather seat creaked softly as he settled into it. The engine hummed to life with the quiet power of German engineering. He guided the Lexus out of the station lot, past the concrete and the weeds, and onto Route 22. The drive home took 17 minutes. He did not turn on the radio. He did not make any phone calls. He simply drove in silence, processing what had happened, considering what it meant, thinking about all the others who had experienced similar encounters without the credentials to end them. His wife, Eleanor, was waiting when he pulled into the garage. She was a retired pediatrician, 58 years old, with the kind of patient wisdom that comes from a career spent caring for children and reassuring worried parents. She took one look at his face and knew something had happened. Raymond, what is it? He told her. All of it. The stop, the accusations, the threats, the eventual revelation, the lieutenant's apology. He told her about standing at that gas pump, being treated like a criminal, about the cold anger that had burned in his chest, about the moment he had been forced to invoke his judicial credentials just to be treated with basic human dignity. Eleanor listened without interrupting. When he finished, she took his hand in both of hers. You should have told him immediately who you were. That's not the point, Ellie. I shouldn't have had to. I know. But you scared me. What if that officer had panicked? What if he had... She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. They both knew what could have happened. They had watched the same news reports, read the same headlines, mourned the same names. Driving while Black had claimed lives before. It could have claimed his. I'm fine, the judge said. I'm home, and this is not over. The video posted by Teresa Mendez hit social media at 11:47 that night. She uploaded it to 3 platforms simultaneously, each post accompanied by a caption that read simply, "This is what happened at a gas station in Maplewood County tonight. Watch the whole thing." The footage was not professional. It was slightly shaky, shot from a distance, with ambient noise that sometimes obscured the conversation, but the essentials were unmistakable. A black man in a suit, a white police officer with his hand on his weapon, accusations of a stolen vehicle, the demand for credentials, the threat of arrest, and then the reveal, the gold badge catching the light, the officer's expression shifting from aggression to shock. By morning, The video had been viewed 1.4 million times. By noon, that number had doubled. News outlets picked up the story. Headlines spread across local and national media. Judge detained at gas station. Video shows. Maplewood officer threatening arrest. Shocking footage. State Superior Court justice targeted by police. This is what profiling looks like. Viral video sparks outrage. The Maplewood County Police Department issued a statement at 9:30 a.m., acknowledging that an incident had occurred and promising a thorough investigation. The statement was carefully worded, designed to convey concern without admitting wrongdoing. It satisfied no one. By the end of the day, Officer Derek Stanton had been placed on administrative leave, pending the outcome of the investigation. His personnel file was suddenly receiving attention from people who had never bothered to read it before. The 14 prior complaints were no longer buried. They were evidence. Judge Caldwell held a press conference outside the courthouse where he had spent nearly 2 decades serving the law. His suit was pressed, his tie was knotted perfectly, his voice was steady. Behind him stood his wife, his attorney, and a small group of fellow judges who had come to show support. Last night, I stopped at a gas station to refuel my car, an ordinary act that millions of Americans perform every day without incident. But for me, for people who look like me, that ordinary act carries risks that others do not face. I was stopped by a police officer who had no legal basis for the stop. I was accused of a crime that had never been committed. I was threatened with arrest for asserting my constitutional rights. He paused, looking directly into the cameras. I am a judge. I have dedicated my life to the law, and even I am not immune. If this can happen to me, imagine what happens to people who do not have my credentials. Imagine the encounters that are not recorded. Imagine the voices that are never heard. The questions came in a barrage. What would he do next? Was he considering legal action? Did he believe the officer would be held accountable? I have retained counsel, the judge replied. We are exploring all available options, and I will say this, accountability is not optional, it is essential. The systems that failed last night must be examined. The patterns that allowed this officer to operate must be addressed. Change is not just possible, it is necessary. The investigation proceeded over the following weeks with a speed that surprised many observers. The viral video had created pressure that the department could not ignore. Internal Affairs conducted extensive interviews. Dashcam footage was reviewed. Officer Stanton's history was examined in detail that it had never received before. The pattern that emerged was damning. Of the 14 prior complaints against Stanton, 11 involved Black or Latino drivers. The reasons cited for the stops were almost uniformly pretextual. Broken taillights that turned out to be functioning, lane changes that violated no laws, vague suspicions that never materialized into evidence. In 8 of those cases, the vehicles were searched. Nothing illegal was ever found. Officer Stanton had been profiling motorists for years. His supervisors had either not noticed or not cared. The complaints had been processed and dismissed, one after another, allowing the behavior to continue unchecked. Meanwhile, Teresa Mendez became an unlikely public figure. Journalists tracked down the woman who had recorded the encounter, and she gave several interviews about what she had witnessed. I saw what was happening, and I knew it was wrong, she said. I thought about just walking away, minding my own business. But then I thought about my uncle, about everything he went through. I thought about all the times this happens, and nobody sees it. So I started recording. I didn't know if anyone would ever watch it. I just knew it needed to be documented. Her footage had accomplished what years of complaints had failed to do. It had made the invisible visible. It had provided evidence that could not be dismissed or explained away. Judge Caldwell filed suit against the Maplewood County Police Department 5 weeks after the incident. The lawsuit sought $15.2 million in damages, citing unlawful detention, violation of civil rights, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The complaint ran to 47 pages, detailing not just the events of that September evening, but the systemic failures that had allowed Officer Stanton to continue his pattern of profiling. The department's initial response was defensive. Attorneys filed motions seeking dismissal. Spokespersons issued statements emphasizing that the officer had been placed on leave, that the investigation was ongoing, that the department did not condone discrimination. But the evidence was overwhelming. The video showed exactly what had happened. The officer's history showed exactly what kind of officer he was. The department's failure to act on prior complaints showed exactly what kind of oversight had been lacking. Settlement discussions began within 8 weeks. The county could have fought the lawsuit, could have dragged the case through years of litigation, but the political calculus was clear. Every day the case remained in the headlines was another day of damage to the department's reputation. Every day of trial would bring testimony that painted an unflattering picture of institutional failures. The settlement was announced 3.5 months after the incident. The terms were not disclosed publicly, but sources familiar with the agreement indicated that Judge Caldwell received a substantial sum, well into 8 figures. More importantly, the settlement included provisions for reform. Officer Derek Stanton was terminated from the Maplewood County Police Department. His law enforcement certification was revoked, ensuring he could not simply move to another jurisdiction and continue the same behavior. He would never wear a badge again. The department agreed to implement mandatory bias training for all officers. A civilian oversight board was established to review complaints and monitor patterns. The complaint process was reformed to ensure that concerns raised by citizens would receive genuine investigation rather than reflexive dismissal. Lieutenant Margaret Chen was promoted to captain and given responsibility for overseeing the implementation of these reforms. In an interview months later, she reflected on what had happened. "I became a police officer because I believed in protecting people, all people. What happened that night at the gas station was a failure of that mission. It was a failure that I am committed to preventing from ever happening again." We owe that to Judge Caldwell. We owe that to every citizen who has been unfairly targeted. We owe it to ourselves. What does this story tell us? What lessons can we draw from an encounter that lasted less than half an hour but resonated across the country? Perhaps the most important lesson is about the power of documentation. For years, Officer Stanton's behavior had been hidden from public view. Complaints were filed and forgotten. Patterns were ignored. But a single video, recorded by a single witness on a single phone, changed everything. It made the invisible visible. It transformed allegations into evidence. In an era when nearly everyone carries a camera in their pocket, accountability becomes possible in ways it never was before. Teresa Mendez did not set out to become an activist. She simply recorded what she saw because she knew it was wrong. And that recording achieved what 14 formal complaints could not. The story also tells us something about the persistence of prejudice. Judge Caldwell was everything that Officer Stanton was not. He was educated, accomplished, respected. He held a position of genuine authority, and none of that protected him from being targeted based on his race. If a sitting judge can be detained at a gas station for the crime of driving while black, then truly no one is safe from such treatment. This is not a comfortable truth. It challenges the narrative that success provides insulation from discrimination. It suggests that no matter how high you climb, no matter how much you achieve, certain assumptions will follow you. The battle against prejudice cannot be won by individual accomplishment alone. It requires systemic change. And that brings us to the final lesson. Systems can change. They do not change easily. They do not change quickly, but they change. The Maplewood County Police Department that exists today is different from the one that existed before that September evening. Officers receive different training. Complaints receive different attention. Oversight operates differently. These changes are not complete. They may never be complete, but they are real. Before we conclude, I want to ask you one more time to engage with this story. Do you think justice was served in this case? Was the settlement enough? Were the reforms meaningful? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you have made it this far, if this story has resonated with you, I would ask you to share it with someone who needs to hear it. These conversations matter. This channel exists to bring you stories like this one, stories about ordinary moments that reveal extraordinary truths about the society we live in. Subscribe if you have not already, and join us as we continue to explore the collision between power and justice. The Shell station on Route 22 still stands. Drivers still pull in to refuel, buy snacks, stretch their legs on long journeys. Most of them have no idea what happened at Pump 7 on that humid September evening. They see only a gas station, ordinary and unremarkable, a place to pass through on the way to somewhere else. But for Judge Raymond Caldwell, that place will always be something more. It will be the spot where he was forced to choose between his dignity and his credentials. It will be the stage where he discovered that 19 years on the bench could not protect him from an officer with assumptions and authority. It will be the location where a single encounter exposed fractures in a system he had devoted his life to serving. I spent my whole career believing that the law could be fair, Judge Caldwell said in an interview months after the settlement. That evening tested that belief. But here is what I learned. The law is only as fair as the people who enforce it. And when those people fail, the rest of us must hold them accountable. Not because we want to tear down institutions, but because we want to make them worthy of the faith we place in them. He still drives the same Lexus. He still stops at gas stations when the tank runs low. But now, every time he pulls up to a pump, he carries with him the memory of that September evening, the flash of red and blue lights, the officer's hand on his weapon, the cold anger in his chest, and the knowledge that sometimes the most consequential courtroom is not a wood-paneled chamber with a bench and a gavel. Sometimes it is a gas station parking lot, lit by buzzing fluorescent lights, witnessed by security cameras and a woman with a phone, where the verdict on justice is rendered not by judges, but by all of us. The story of Judge Raymond Caldwell did not end with a settlement check or a departmental reform. It continued in the conversations it sparked, the awareness it raised, the changes it inspired in communities far beyond Maplewood County. It continued every time someone shared the video and said, "This is what profiling looks like." It continued every time an officer paused before making a stop based on nothing but assumption, knowing that cameras might be watching, that witnesses might be recording, that accountability might be coming. Change comes slowly. It comes imperfectly. It comes through struggle and setback and stubborn persistence. But it comes, and sometimes it starts with a single moment, a single encounter, a single man standing at a gas pump, refusing to sit on a curb, demanding to be treated with the dignity that every citizen deserves. That is the lesson of pump number 7. That is the legacy of a September evening, and that is why stories like this one must be told, must be heard, must be remembered, because in the end, the question is not whether injustice exists. We know it does. The question is what we do about it. The question is whether we stay silent or speak up, whether we look away or bear witness, whether we accept the world as it is or fight for the world as it should be. Judge Caldwell made his choice. Teresa Mendez made hers. Now the choice passes to us. What will we do with it? The camera never blinks. The truth waits to be recorded. And somewhere, right now, another encounter is unfolding. Another person is being stopped. Another story is beginning. May we have the courage to tell it.